With your background and rationale, project summary, goals, methods, and indicators and outputs completed, you're halfway done with your grant. Congratulations. In addition to being halfway done, you've already completed the hardest parts of the grant writing process. So take a moment, step back, and congratulate yourself for the hard work. This video will cover 4 sections remaining in the grant proposal: who will benefit, preliminary results, figures and tables, and references. In the next video, we'll go over your budget and timeline. In this video today, I will go over with you the expectations and requirements for these 4 sections. You will learn how to connect these sections to the rest of your grant in a way that is clear and concise. And the goal from this video is for you to be able to ground your proposal in existing relationships and/or research, and demonstrate that you are ultimately well prepared to successfully execute your proposed project. And again, here are the sections we will be going over, highlighted here. And as I mentioned, the timeline section we will discuss in the next video when we also talk about budget. So let's begin with the who will benefit section. You have a maximum of 150 words for this section, so it is important to remain concise. But what we're ultimately interested in this section is who specifically will benefit from your work. And this may be specific individuals, it may be a group of people, it may be a full community or an agency. It will vary depending on the scope of your proposed project. And there may be multiple beneficiaries as well. In addition to listing the beneficiaries, we'd like you to explain how your work will benefit these people, groups, or agencies. And then finally, importantly, please communicate how you will share your results or recommendations, if recommendations are a part of your final deliverable, and explain what groundwork has been done to cultivate the relevant relationships already. Importantly, addressing how you know that these groups will be receptive and open to any recommendations or results that you may bring. Again, we can bring this section back to the theory of change logic model that you created early on in the grant proposal process. And you may find many beneficiaries listed in the inputs and/or in the short, medium, and long-term outcomes. The inputs, you may have included existing relationships that are in place to help your project happen. And that's not a requirement to include here, but if you did include something there, that would be a good thing to include in the who will benefit section. That demonstrates that you already have relationships with your proposed beneficiaries, which shows, again, that sense of receptiveness and that you know you will be able to have an effective outcome with the results that you find through your proposed project. With that in mind, you'll also find who will benefit from your work in your outcomes sections. And so using our filled in example here, we can see that this person included connections with the WWF and Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife as existing connections that they had to start the project. So they already knew there was going to be a sense of receptivity here, which is something that they would then want to include in their who will benefit section. In addition, you see multiple places where local communities are benefiting from this project. Local communities will have increased awareness about sea turtle health, new skills for removing turtles stuck in nets, and an ultimate outcome of available food for more local people. In addition, better policy guidance and design for protecting turtles is part of the short and medium term outcomes, which connects directly to this person's connection with the WWF and Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife. So here you have two different beneficiary communities, conservation officials, as well as local communities. A clear sense of how these communities will benefit, as well as existing connections to show receptivity to whatever this person ultimately finds in their work. Similarly, here's a written example inspired by the 2022 grant that we have been using throughout. This reads, beneficiaries will include cocoa farmers in the region. From our previous research, we have existing relationships with 10 cocoa farms in the west region of Cameroon. These are the same locations at which we will conduct the research for this project. These farmers see the value of preserving bird species as a means of biological pest control for their cocoa crops and have thus indicated their interest in participating with the conservation effort. Additionally, they have existing positive relationships with other farmers not directly included in our study and have indicated willingness to share their learnings and/or connect us in the future. So here you see a clear demonstration of beneficiaries being cocoa farmers. Through this person's research, they will be identifying potential avian pathogens that interrupt the pest control cycles that birds biologically provide for these cocoa farmers, indication that the farmers are receptive to what is learned through this study, as well as indication of future expansion of relationships as necessary. Next is your preliminary results section, which can be brief. We only have 100 words here maximum. But the important thing to include in this section is whether your proposed project is supporting or continuing work that you have already done. And if yes, briefly describe the results of your previous work. If no, it's completely acceptable to just write none for this section and move on. So this may come from your problem statement. It may be that in a previous project, you identified gaps in knowledge or other types of problems that you hope to address through this proposed project. And/or you may also find it in your input section of your theory of change logic model. That may be just initial results that you hope to bolster with your proposed project. So here's an example of a project where the preliminary results section would just indicate none. As you can see here, in the problem statement, there's no indication that this is part of this person's previous research, nor are either of the inputs existing projects or past research results. So it would be completely acceptable to just write none for this person's project and move on. By contrast, in our written example, this person did do previous research that brought them to this particular research proposal. They've stated, from our previous research using fecal metabarcoding, we identified many species of insectivorous birds that eat brown capsikids, Africa's #1 cocoa pest, and other pests in Cameroonian cocoa farms. These species are important both biologically and economically. By identifying the bird's role as biological pest control, our work emphasizes that they are of conservation priority. However, the status of these species as connected to common global avian pathogens remains unknown, thus limiting possible conservation initiatives. The CARN funding would help address this important gap. So as you can see, they've very briefly outlined their previous work and what the results were, and then explained what the existing gap is and how they hope to build on that work through the Aspire grant. The next piece I'll just briefly mention is the figures and tables section. You may include figures and tables for any of the sections of this grant. It's absolutely not a requirement. However, if you do include figures or tables, it's really important that you reference and expand upon these figures and/or tables in the text of your proposal, whichever section you include them. So whether you want to include them in your background and rationale section, in your methods section, anywhere is fine, but you should clearly reference the tables and the figures so that your reviewers have a sense of what they're looking at when they review your figures. In addition, you can have a maximum of 2 figures and 2 tables. So 4 additional pieces of data visualization, no more than that, and you can absolutely have less. Again, this section is not a requirement, but it is possible to include if you find that it would be helpful for communicating your proposed project. And finally, your references section. We've asked you to cite references inline throughout, which we've discussed in previous videos. And so in this references section, you'll provide the full reference rather than just the inline citation so that your reviewers can get a sense of where your work is coming from. Again, be sure that you're citing your sources throughout, and then you'll include this full reference list. A couple things to keep in mind here. Your citation style and formatting should be consistent throughout your entire reference list. A common mistake we've seen in the past is that the formatting is different between different references. So some are in Chicago style, some are in APA style, some abbreviate the first initial of the author's first name, some include the full first name. So make sure you check your reference list for consistency throughout before you submit your grant. Additionally, your references should be organized in alphabetical order by first author, last name. As with previous videos, I've given you some worksheets. And as always, I encourage you to work with a mentor or a colleague or a peer as you work through this application to get consistent feedback and review your work. I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one, where we will go over your budget and timeline.